this week's episode, we have on the show Lazou. Lazou is a music artist, producer, mixing engineer, composer, podcaster, and writer. She was born in Canada and raised in Mauritius, which is a tiny island at East Africa, and currently she is living in the US. She is the host of the podcast called Nuances, Our Asian Stories. The show explores our complicated relationships with our cultures and how they shape us, featuring guests from a wide range of Asian ethnic groups, careers, and communities. So, before becoming a full-time creative, Lazou was a data scientist for one of the Silicon Valley giants. Her confidence and unconventional path may have something to do with her emergency open heart surgery when she was age 22. So, just like her podcast, this conversation I had with the zoo really helped us to dive deeper into the nuances of our Asian upbringing and how we can use our specific experiences and life events as we are carving out our own path in adulthood. We talked about topics like Lazou's relationship with her body after her surgery and how seeking body neutrality might be the final destination. We also talked about the Asian way to transition from being corporate into becoming a creative entrepreneur. So this conversation, I feel like is such a breath of fresh air in today's, online industry. And I know that Lizou's thoughts and stories will inspire you. And she really brings a different perspective about what it can look like being a content creator in today's world. So, without further ado, let's dive in. All right, welcome to the show, Lazoo.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to talk about and to really listen on your stories and have you share with the audience about some of your experiences and what that has been like for you, both in your music career and also in a lot of other things as well. So, in your own words, who is the zoo?
Lazou is this person who doesn't quite fit in any category. I have multiple cultural backgrounds, I have multiple career backgrounds, I have multiple interests. So I grew up on a tiny island in the middle of the Indian Ocean called Mauritius. It's the only place the dodo bird ever lived. And I'm of Chinese descent. So I grew up with a version of Chinese culture that has been on the island for 3 or 4 generations. I grew up feeling Chinese, but then when I got out of that environment and I met other people who are also of Chinese background, but maybe came from China or grew up in a different place, I was like, oh, my version of Chinese culture is very different from everybody else. So after that, I went to Canada and now I'm in LA. I started my career in computer science and now I am a creative of sorts. I make music, I make podcasts, I write. Yeah, just having fun with life.
I literally just Googled dodo bird and wow, they're huge.
They're huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're
Wow.
easy to catch and eat.
That's so cool. Yeah. And it really sounds like, and also you also have a podcast as well, right? Called Nuances. And I can
Yeah.
tell you are a person with lots of nuances and living in between, like
Mhm.
in between the lines and not really feeling like you fully fit into one culture because you just have so diverse with your upbringing. How has it been like for you when you first, I don't know, like settle into the US?
Well, I went to Canada first, and that
Mm,
was not as much of a shock because I had family there, and also, I don't know, downtown Toronto is very easy to get acclimated to, other than the cold. It was definitely cold. But moving to the US, I think I felt a lot more like I was out of my element. I felt more foreigner. I felt even the paperwork is very different. You know, when you go to Canada, you're considered a new immigrant or a new Canadian, right? And then when you come to the US, you're called a resident alien. So there's like subtle little things that, once you cross the border, you're like, oh, that is different. Because when I was growing up, Europe, Canada, the US, Australia, it's all the West to me. I think they are all the same, you know? And then when I moved to the US, I'm like, oh, there is actually a difference between US and Canada. And then understanding how the healthcare system works here has been a whole other thing, but let's
Mm,
not get into that. That's a whole other podcast.
mm. And yeah, so are you like in US right now? Do you think you will be living there for a long time?
I don't know. I'm always open to possibilities. And I think having moved countries two times already, I'm never closing that option. I'm like, if there is an opportunity to move somewhere and it sounds like a fun thing, I'd do it. So I'm not ruling anything out.
The reason I'm asking that is because I recently just moved to Taiwan and I'm planning to stay here for 6 months. I've been in Canada for a long time, almost 20 years, and it just feel like something's gotta change. I've just been curious about what makes people want to stay in certain places and what makes them also want to move to a different country and
Yeah.
start a new life there. So, yeah, it's always been something that's on my mind right now.
Yeah. What made you want to go to Taiwan?
Honestly, I think there's a part of me that's like, I'm just miss Taiwan and just miss connecting with my roots. And then after coming back, I just feel so at home. Yeah, even though everything it's like foreign but at home at the same time.
Yeah.
So th that's my reason. And I'm curious to see people who are not from the country living in other countries and what that has been like for them.
I mean, I'm definitely not closing that option, definitely considering options more since November. But I can definitely resonate with what you're saying about missing your roots. And I think, especially if you left when you were very young, I left right out of high school. I was excited to go somewhere else, to live in a big city for the first time, to see snow for the first time, and to live in an English speaking country. I didn't grow up speaking English every day. So it was all exciting. But with that excitement, I also did not really appreciate my roots as much at the time. And I think now we get to the point where we're like, oh, I have developed a new appreciation for the culture I grew up in. I would love to explore that more. I'd love to know more about my own history. Where did we come from? Why did we leave China? Like, I've been kind of going down those rabbit holes lately myself, so I could definitely relate to what you're saying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like our own very different story as we are living in a Western country with our Chinese and Taiwanese upbringing in the culture. So that's been very, very different. And I know that there is a very important life event at age 22 where you had an emergency open heart surgery that really shaped your perspectives and how you feel about your body. Can you share about that story and let the people know what has that has been like for you?
Yeah. So when I was two, I was diagnosed with a heart murmur. And at the time, we were in Mauritius, and my parents, the doctor told them we should have her operated on. I was 2 years old. My parents freaked out and they asked for a second opinion. The guy sent the case to some experts in France or something. And they're like, well, if you don't want to operate, you can wait, but you just have to monitor her and make sure she's, growing okay and all that. And so they're like, okay, let's wait then. So I grew up going to the cardiologist every 6 months, every year, every other year. As I grew up, it got further and further apart, and I was doing fine. And then one day I was 22. I had been clubbing all night with friends. I'd just gotten back home. It was, Sunday morning. I wake up and I hear my heart. And, a regular heart goes, and I could hear it very loudly without any amplification. I could hear it go, and it was going really fast too. It was like much faster. So I was like, huh, that is weird. And I got up, I tried to do some stuff. and I think at some point I fainted in the bathroom. Like I got really dizzy and I kind of had to get down on the floor and I lost consciousness for, I don't know, maybe a few seconds. And then I woke up. I tell my roommate, he took me to the hospital and they're like, oh, well, you're just getting over a real bad cold. We'll give you some IV fluids. You can go home. And then the next day, I was doing an internship at the time. So I went to work and I could barely walk like to the end of this room without getting out of breath. So I left early. I was like, something's not right here. Went back to the hospital. They did all kinds of tests. So that's Monday night. Come Thursday afternoon, the surgeon comes into my room and he says, well, based on everything you've told us and based on all the tests we've done, it is your heart. The problem that you've had since you were a kid, you've also had an aneurysm, the aneurysm ruptured. Basically, you need surgery. And I said, oh, well, can I wait till my parents get here? Because they were already freaking out and they were already trying to get a visa. And he was like, nah, you need it tomorrow. I was like, oh, okay. I was like, what happens if I don't do it tomorrow? He's like, I wouldn't recommend it.
Oh my
I was like,
God.
okay, I guess tomorrow it is. I think the good thing about that is that I didn't have a lot of time to think about it, you know? And I happened to be at the hospital, like a big cardiac center in Toronto. So I was like, they must know what they're doing. Should be fine. I'm 22. I'm very optimistic about life. So I did. I went, I got the surgery, I got out. And I think the night before, I remember at one point, I was alone in my room and I thought for a little bit, like, oh, once I do the surgery, I'm gonna have this huge scar. And what would that be like? And will I ever feel comfortable wearing a bikini again? Like I'm still very young. So I go to bed, wake up the next day, get the surgery, and then when I wake up, my parents are here, and a couple of days later, I go home. And one of the first things my mom said was, do you want us to go buy you some turtlenecks? And I don't know why, but I had such a visceral reaction to that comment. Like, ugh, no, absolutely not. And I said, I want to be comfortable with how I look. And my mom was like, well, it's kind of bloody, maybe you might freak some people out. And I'm like, well, if they freak out, that's on them. I went through the surgery. I went through the pain. They can tolerate looking at my scar. It's fine. Like I'm not going to, because the thing too is if I chose to cover it up, I think the longer I cover it up, the longer it would take me to then stop covering it up. And I also felt like if I started wearing turtlenecks, that would mean that I'm making choices about how I live my life based on this scar. Like this scar would
Mm.
change how I live, how I dress, what I think about when I'm buying clothes. And I was like, this is too much. I don't want to deal with that. I'm just going to live my life the way I've been living up until now. And if it bothers people, then, well, it bothers people, whatever, you know? But I didn't realize that this would really help me overcome something that many of us grow up with, which is feeling like as Asian women, as Asian people, we don't fit the Western standard of beauty. I always felt like if you're not white, you're not pretty.
Mm.
Like that's what's been ingrained in me from being a little girl. Like all the Barbies were blonde, all the actors in the TV shows were blonde. All the magazines, they're all white people. I didn't grow up exposed to any Chinese media at all. So like I never saw any representation whatsoever. I had this ingrained in me without even realizing it. And I think because of that scar and because of how I dealt with it, I slowly embraced the idea that my body doesn't have to be pretty. What's most important is that it's healthy, that I can do what I need to do, and that I try to keep it as healthy as possible. But it's not really necessarily about looks because, when I interact with other people, I'm not interacting with them based on their looks. So why am I putting that extra pressure on myself to look a certain way when really a body is just a body and it doesn't need to be beautiful to be worth loving, to be worth protecting. And as I embrace that idea, I kind of automatically let go of this Eurocentric beauty standard. And it's been so freeing.
I love that. It's like the heart surgery and the scar, instead of letting it close you off and covering it with more clothing, you decide to let it open yourself up.
Yeah. And I think, in Chinese culture, I've noticed, and I'm sure in many other Asian cultures too, like if somebody has a surgery, usually they will try to cover it up. Like
Hmm.
I knew an aunt who had a throat surgery and she was wearing a scarf all the time. And, I've seen other people, they have a scar on their arm and they always wear long sleeves. And I'm like, well, why though? I mean, it's not, why are we supposed to be ashamed of a scar? It's not like you did something wrong. On the contrary, you fixed something. You got better. You're
Hmm.
healthier now than you were before the surgery. So I didn't understand why there was such a culture of shame around it. And I thought, well, maybe me just walking around with this big gash on my chest at 22 years old, maybe it'll help other people be like, oh, if she's doing it, maybe I can do it too. You know, maybe that's not such a big deal. Yeah.
The scar has freed you from all the stereotypes and all the limitations of what you thought that, like in the Asian culture, what you're supposed to do with your scar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful. And I think you touched on something about body neutrality, which I think is so important. The fact that, and it's very interesting how you mentioned that for you growing up, you saw like the Western, the European, you have to be white to look pretty. For me, because I came to Canada when I was about 10 years old, so for me, beauty is an Asian girl, but
Oh.
yeah, but very skinny Asian girl.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
so growing up in my family, in the families I see around me, there's this big stigma about how you have to look with a certain weight, especially when it comes to women. And it's so obvious, it's so prevalent, like during family events where the relatives, like the aunties, can be so savage and they can
Oh,
just look at
yes.
you. Yeah, and they can just be like, "Did you get fatter?" Or like you need to eat less. Don't eat too much of this. Or they're either so extreme, either like you're too skinny, you should eat more. Or like
Yeah.
you're too fat, you shouldn't eat. They're so extreme about it, right? And I love how you talked about the fact that, we don't even need to make our body look a certain way. It's not even something to think about, but you can just be with what is. Like your body itself, it's functioning, it's healthy, it's keeping you alive, it's doing its magic, and it's doing all these things within you, and it just deserves to be loved right now as it is without needing to change anything about it.
Yeah. And if you think about how much energy we waste as women since we were little girls worrying about, am I too fat? Am I too skinny? Am I pretty enough? How do I treat my skin? How do I make my teeth whiter? Do I need, wait, what was that? Invisalign, like all these things that we worry about. Like, think about how much energy we spend on that and like, what should I be wearing? Like, how should I be doing my hair every day? How much time do I need to do my makeup every day? Like, all of that, like just think about all of the energy, all of the brain space it takes up, and then think about what it would be like to not have to think about that at all, and just how much energy, how much of your life you would get back, and how much more of yourself you could give to other things that you're interested in. highly recommend. 10 out of 10.
Oh my gosh, I forgot her name. But there was a comedian. Let me know if you know who she is. But there was a comedian, and she was talking about how it's very interesting how men don't need to get ready. And what she sees is women are always just getting ready all the time. Like men just go to bed, men just get up, go to work. Women's like getting ready for work, getting ready for go to bed. Even when we go to bed, we have to get ready. We have to put on skincare, all the things. All the
Yeah.
things we need to do to get ready. Like we spend so much effort and energy in our lifetime getting ready for something.
Yeah. My goal, and I've been doing this probably most of my adult life. Like I can get up and be out of the house in 15 minutes. I don't have a very complicated routine. I do like, skincare, like very basic. I don't have any complicated thing. I don't do a lot of makeup. I will do makeup once in a while, like if I'm going to a party or I'm on camera or something, maybe a little bit. I don't do a lot. And also, I kind of feel like when I do the makeup for a show or something, I do look nicer. I do feel like I look nicer, but I want people to get used to the uglier version so they don't have the expectation. You know what I mean? Like just lower all the expectation. And then once in a while they're like, "You clean up nice." I'm like, "Yeah, I know."
That's so funny. And also because, when you're just showing people your bare face and just who you are for a long time, you go out there and you interact with people. Naturally, that's how people feel with the aura around you, and that's how they kind of reflect back to you instead of
Hmm.
needing to cover up. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
how
I
I
mean,
feel.
I think to me, like, I don't even go out thinking I look good. I just go out. I don't even think about how I look. I mean, I'm not gonna go out in PJs, but I I don't worry too much about whether I'm looking a certain way. It's like this is the face I got. I'm going out. I got things to do. Yeah.
Yeah. So what would you say to someone who is like maybe in their upbringing, they're being fed a lot of those messages about how they should look, women should look with their bodies, or like people who feel kind of insecure about how they look. Do you have any tips or any thoughts that you can offer them?
I mean, you if you are somebody who does have a lot of those very long routines of getting ready and you feel like you need it to be confident and you want to do less of it, maybe start small, and maybe I don't know, what's like an elaborate. Let's say you do a full face of makeup every morning and then you do your hair, and all of that. Well, maybe try not doing it on the weekend, and see how that goes. Like maybe just go to the grocery store once and don't worry about it and see how that feels. And just try to remind yourself also that everybody lives in their own world and they aren't watching you as much as you think they are. Like they're thinking about their own thing. They're worrying about how they look, right? And so I think we over emphasize how people might perceive us or how much they think about us in our heads. In reality, people have their own stuff going on. They don't have time to think about me or whether I did my makeup today or did my hair today. They that's not really what people are thinking about. And so trying to not feel like you have to do that for other people is something that could work. But, if you feel like it makes you too uncomfortable, you can start small and then increase it. Also, maybe there are other things that make you feel confident. Identify those. Like it doesn't have to all be physical. Like maybe it's the way that you talk. I don't know. Or maybe it's the way that you carry yourself, the way you walk. Like if you walk in a certain way with confidence, but no makeup, do people treat you like same person? It's not just about physical appearance as well. And so just play around with it and baby steps. And remember that a body is just a body. We're all going to get old and wrinkly. And I think we should enjoy the body that we have right now rather than hating it and beating it up and, depriving it of delicious food.
Yeah. And I feel like if it's hard for you to, you know, you don't even have to get to a place where you feel super confident or like, I don't know, think you look beautiful or something like that.
That's the difference between body positivity and body neutrality. Body
Hmm.
positivity, I don't like because it tells you to tell yourself, I'm pretty, I'm beautiful, I love myself. If you grew up feeling like you're not pretty, that doesn't work. I'm sorry, but it doesn't. Maybe at some point it might, but you have to get to the point where you at least don't hate it and you kind of accept yourself the way that you are and you're just fine with it. And I don't know, some people might consider body positivity to be like the next phase after you reach body neutrality, but I think that's the final destination because you don't even have to care about being beautiful because being beautiful is not necessarily a thing we need to aspire to. You know, your value as a human does not necessarily have to have anything to do with how you look physically. You're so much more than what you look like, you're so much more than your body. And just like you wouldn't treat your friends differently if they look different, you shouldn't treat yourself differently, you know?
I remember when I first kind of like put myself out there online because a lot of people in the audience, they're kind of like online creators. And I care so much about how I looked, makeup, everything. And nowadays I'm just like, do I have my t-shirt on? Am I revealing everything? Anything? No? Okay, I'm good.
You look great. And yeah, I think to me, just like that night before the surgery, when I was starting to think about it, I'm like, don't think about it, don't think about it. That is something that can help you when you're just starting on this journey. Like if you're going out and you're like, oh no, I didn't do my hair today. Don't think about it. Try not to think about it. And just tell yourself, nobody's looking, nobody noticed, don't think about it. And with time, you might notice that you actually stopped thinking about it. And it's great because you have time to think about other more important things.
Oh, that's so good. It's like someone who is truly feeling neutral and relaxed with how they look. They're not even thinking about
Oh, yeah, I don't
how
even
they
think about
look.
it at all.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I mean, I try not to be super sloppy, but I also will not spend 30 minutes getting ready. When I get ready, it's if I'm doing makeup, totally max 15 minutes. And that's because I'm probably gonna have to redo it because I'm bad at it. You know what I mean? Like,
Me too.
but if I'm just going to the grocery store, I'm never wearing any makeup. I'm just slipping on jeans and a t-shirt, and like I'm very simple that way. And you don't have to be, if you like fashion, that doesn't mean you can't have that, but it shouldn't rule your life, you know?
Yeah. And I think especially if we apply this to us presenting ourselves online, how you look and how you dress shouldn't be the thing that stops you from just showing up and doing what you are called to do, right? Because I guess unless your look has to do with your profession, but I feel like if you're an artist, you're a creative, the reason you are marketing online is because of your skills. It's because of your music. It's because of your art. It's not because of how you look physically. And if we
Yeah.
can remove that layer and just focus on the fact that, oh, I'm here to just share my gift. It has nothing to do with how I look or, how I'm dressed, then it's like what Lazou was saying. You just feel when you feel relaxed with your body, you're not even thinking about how you look, and that's when you can actually focus on what actually matters.
Yeah. And it's not, I think people sometimes think that if you don't care about what you look, that you're going to be sloppy. And that could be true, but it doesn't have to be. You can still, look presentable, whatever that means, but you don't have to spend that much effort on it, you know? It's like, yeah, you maybe want to put some clothes on, but it shouldn't be the roadblock. Yeah.
Yes. I think this is a great transition to really talking about your music career because you're also an awesome musician, producer, an artist. Can you share with us about how you transitioned into this career?
Yeah. Well, I started out in engineering. I was working for one of the big Silicon Valley companies, and I was a data scientist there for about 5 years, a little bit less than 5 years. And towards the end of it, I was feeling less fulfilled. At the beginning, it was very exciting, very interesting, but my entire life I've been itching to do something creative, and I never got the chance to do that until that point, like really focus on it. And so I really felt like I wanted to do that. And so I planned my exit. A lot of times when you hear stories of people changing careers and going into the arts, it's like one day I quit my job and I jumped headfirst into this thing. And I would say, please don't do that. There are ways you can do that less dramatically and with a better plan. So I planned my exit for almost a year. I budgeted, try to figure out how much money do I need to live every month? How much of my stuff do I actually need? Can we downsize? Should we sell the house? How much time would my savings allow me to do this if I had zero income? How long can I have zero income and still be okay? These are all things you should be asking yourself before you hand in your resignation. Unless you're in a situation where like this job is literally impossible and, really ruining your health or your mental health in a very severe way. Like I feel like I was in a very bad place. So I went to therapy. So my mental health was affected. But I really am glad that I did what I did, where I didn't just quit, even though I would have loved to. It wouldn't have been wise, you know? Instead, I planned everything so I knew exactly how much my savings were going to help me, how long I would have before I would need to start making money. And also, I made sure to transition all my projects to various people in the team. So that way, if I ever had to go back to work, guess what? They would want me back. You should never burn bridges that you don't need to burn, you know? I remember when I left, people were like, we've never had a handover this smooth before. So be that person. Be the person who does things in a really nice way for the people you're leaving behind. And then they will want to have you back if you ever need a job. As I said at the very beginning of the interview, I'm not closing any options ever. So right now I'm doing creative stuff. Maybe someday I might want to go back into tech. I'm not closing that possibility. I still find it interesting, but at the time, I felt like I needed a break from it. I needed to be able to explore my creative endeavors. But, life is long.
I think this is totally the Asian way.
Be
Yeah.
Asian. Asian's great.
Yeah, because you're planning your exit very carefully. You're leaving space open. You're preparing for the transition in a very, very smooth way. I think
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah. And I see a lot of advice, especially in entertainment. I think it was Will Smith who said, don't have a plan B because then you'll never get to plan A. And I was like, I don't know. I mean, you made it, but most people are not going to, you know? And then I've seen so many typically white guys give advice about the music industry, and they would be like, you should take a terrible job at Starbucks, and that way you reserve all your brain power for your creative activities. And I'm like, that's terrible advice. If you have a corporate job and you're doing your music on the side, that's totally fine. Like, why is Starbucks better as a side job than a corporate job? Because Starbucks, first of all, pays terrible, benefits also terrible. You have to talk to people all day, and you get yelled at by Karens all day. I don't know. It sounds very unappealing to an introvert like me, you know? But if you love working at Starbucks, that's great. But a lot of people don't. And I don't think that we should be giving advice that you should have this Starbucks job because that's what starving artists do. It's like, that's terrible advice. more money at a corporate job and then get their benefits, get their stock options. If you travel for work at all, you get points, you get free airfare, you can use that to travel and make your art, you know. There's so many benefits to a corporate job that I think many Asian parents will love me for saying on this podcast. And it's totally fine. You don't really have to be doing your art full time to be a real artist. In fact, I think in this economy, you have a better chance of truly just making art for the sake of art if you're not doing it full time. Because if you're doing it full time, you have to chase whatever little money is left in the industry. And a lot of times that comes in the form of making stuff that you don't actually care about, but just sells, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. Like if you enjoy that process, totally go for it. Some people don't like that, and some people prefer to have a job that pays well, gives them healthcare benefits, you know, all that stuff, so they can have their family and they can have some stability and still have time to make their art. So, yeah, you don't need to be a full-time artist to be legit. I think many of the most successful musicians I know actually have a day job.
Mm.
They're making money off of their music too, but they have a day job, and there's no shame in that.
That is such a breath of fresh air, especially since I've been self-employed and having my own business for almost 5 years now. I definitely started off with just burning the boat and going all in at it. Looking back, I probably would still do it again because I'm just that type of person. But the first few years has been so difficult. It
Mhm.
has been so challenging and a lot of stress. It takes a lot of skill to be able to differentiate, making money and also the fact that I'm doing this to help people and this is my art. It had been such a struggle between learning how to
Yeah,
differentiate these two and not putting so much pressure on this thing that is so spiritually connected and so,
it's so important to know what kind of stress you prefer. So in a corporate job, you might have the stress of having a manager and, you know, meetings and all that. As an entrepreneur, you have the stress of you don't know where your next meal will come from and whether you will be able to make rent. Different people have different tolerance for risk. So you have to know yourself, and also you should very much know what kind of drudgery you're okay with. So,
mm,
as a musician who is taking this seriously, doing it as a business, for example, if you want to be in the music industry, you have to be on top of your admin work. So, you have to have all your metadata and you have to chase your royalty streams, you know, you have to know all of that stuff. There's a lot of following up with people, there's a lot of organizing writing sessions, and you have to know what kind of drudge work you'd rather do. Would you rather do that, or would you rather do a programming job that sometimes gets a little boring, you know? And there's no right or wrong answer. It really is based on who you are and what feels less of a pain to you,
mm.
which is why I think if you're considering a big career shift, I would highly, highly recommend therapy because it has helped me get clarity a lot on what I truly value and what would make me happy.
That also works too. Yeah. No, I think it's so good to provide people and let people know that there are options.
Hmm.
Even if eventually you do want to make art your full-time career, but there are options to get in there. It doesn't have to be. And yeah, I feel like the old, way of seeking entrepreneurship, it's like a little bit outdated. You just quit everything and just go all in on something. I mean, if you have the savings for it, it's great, but it definitely will take a while and you have to choose your heart, right? Choose your problems.
Yeah,
And
and you definitely don't want to get to a point where what you quit your job to do, the thing that you loved to do, becomes something that you hate doing. it can get to that point if you didn't really think through all these questions that we just talked about, right? Like if you didn't really think through, like, oh, I didn't realize that I'm going to have to be chasing clients 24/7, and I hate talking to clients. Turns out, like, I like doing the coaching, but I hate doing all the sales stuff and, like all of that. If that's how you feel after a couple years and it takes the joy out of coaching, then maybe it wasn't worth it to quit everything and do it as a full time. But if you don't mind it, then it was worth it. So it all depends on your personality and what you find fulfilling and what you find absolutely intolerable.
Yes. Yeah, and I feel like not everyone is suited to do this alone or to go down the entrepreneur route. There's some aspect about art, about what you do that you love, but then you don't like the entrepreneurship part, then there are different ways that you can do to make it happen for yourself. You can keep your full-time job while just pursuing art. That
Yeah.
can be an option
And
as well for
also,
you.
whatever it is that you choose to do, don't do it alone. Like, there are other people who are trying to do the same thing. Find them, connect with them, network with
Hmm.
them. A lot of the opportunities will come from people you know or people you know that they know. It's a myth that it's the solo entrepreneur who makes it big.
Communities is so important. So thank you, Lazu, today for sharing with us your stories and I guess just touching on a lot of the nuances, with our Asian culture and how we can pursue our path, taking into account that we have this Asian heritage and using what we've learned growing up for us instead of trying to fit ourselves into certain boxes of like the Western culture. And I think you're a perfect example of that, and you really model that to show
Thank
people
you.
that there's a different way that you can do to approach life, approach your career.
Thank you.
So, what is life like for you right now? Just curious. Right now, where's your heart pulling you towards?
Right now, I just finished the latest season of my podcast, which was all about queerness in pre modern Asia. I took an entire year to do this. I researched academic books and articles, I interviewed scholars, and then I brought in people from the community to talk about their experiences in the Asian diaspora as queer people. So that just wrapped up. I'm kind of on vacation right now, in vacation mode.
Mm,
I want to travel. I haven't gone back home since the pandemic, so I've been itching to go back. So I'm
back
planning
home,
some
as in
trips
Canada or
as in Mauritius.
Mauritius? Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So I'm hoping to go on trips this year. I'm also thinking about what I'm going to do next for the next season of Nuances. And I'm also looking at other ideas that I have. I would like to do more exploring about my own family's history as well. I have some interesting family stories that I want to dig into more. Like, what was the context of our migration, and maybe have a few other people also do a similar thing alongside me and kind of share our stories together.
That would be so interesting to learn about your heritage and learn about your roots.
Yeah, because there's so much I don't know. I know that on my mom's side, my great grandfather was supposed to join the army or something, and he was like, no. So he cross dressed as a woman to be able to get away,
Oh, wow.
and like got on a boat with all the women and went to Mauritius from China. So that he fled. And then on my dad's side, my grandmother bought the identity of somebody else to be able to move to Mauritius. So this person lived in Mauritius and wanted to move back to China. And then she was in China and wanted to move to Mauritius. And at the time, I think there was some restriction on migration. And so they like swapped identities to be able to go where they wanted to go. I was like, that's such a fascinating story.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I want to learn about the story.
Yeah, so I was thinking of doing like a podcast series on that because there are many people who have similar stories, and it would be so cool to really get a feel for what that time was like, you know?
That
Yeah,
would be so cool. So, if people want to get to know you better and to find your podcast, it's called Nuances.
right.
Nuances are Asian stories.
Correct. And on social media, we're at nuances pod, Pod, everywhere pretty much. And then I'm at it's Lazou, Lazou.
Okay. Do you share your music on there? People can also find you
Hmm.
as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Lazoo,
Thank
thank
you
you so
so
much for
much for
coming
having me.
on. Thank you. That was so fun.
Thanks so much for having me.